Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. Just in case you don't know me, I'm Jules Townsend. I'm Chief Executive of Community Rail Network. Little bit of housekeeping first of all. I need to let you know that this session is being recorded, so it can be made available afterwards. We will also make the speaker slides available to you all as well. If you can all make sure that you're on mute throughout, so we haven't got any feedback issues, unless of course you are talking or asking a question. So yeah, I'm really delighted to be hosting this webinar, so thank you all for joining us. We are of course focusing this morning on devolution, where the process is up to now and where we're heading, and most importantly, the opportunities that devolution can present for community rail. We know this is a topic that's of great interest to our members. We recognise that that whole process of bringing decision making in transport and rail specifically closer to local communities can really open up greater scope for community rail to develop its role, and particularly for community rail to help communities to have a voice on transport and rail, and for community rail to further shine a light on local issues and opportunities. So our aims for today are to get us all thinking in a bit more detail about the devolution landscape and what it means for different parts of the country, and what the scope might be for community rail to feed in and use the process to increase our impact. We've put the session today together in light of feedback and input we've been gathering from members, including quite recently at our Community Rail conference in October. We do see this as being an important step, an important first step, is having this conversation. There will be ongoing conversations, I think, to be had. The devolution landscape is incredibly complex, and of course different parts of the country at different stages. So our intention is to run follow-up webinars exploring in more detail different aspects of devolution, and to keep this conversation going. Before I hand over to our first speaker, I want to really emphasise that point, that this is a conversation. We've got some excellent speakers today who I hope will provide, I'm sure will provide really useful food for thought and help us get going with that conversation. We've got 2 dedicated Q&A sessions, but you can put questions at any point in the chat, and myself and Alice and Erin will be monitoring those throughout, and then of course during the Q&A sessions you can also raise your hands, and if you do ask a question, please tell us who you are, and keep it fairly succinct, please, to allow time for as many people to speak as possible. I think that's all I need to say by way of an introduction. So I am going to, without further ado, hand over to our first speaker. So I'm really pleased to introduce Monta Drozdova from Urban Transport Group, Policy Manager at Urban Transport Group, who's going to set the scene and talk about the policy framework for devolution. So over to you, Monta.
Thanks so much. Good morning, all, and very well done with pronouncing my last name. That's a first. People usually get it in about 10 goes. Well done, well done. Very good start. Fab, lovely to see you all. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully that works. Oh, 1 second. There we go. Right, hopefully you can see that, and off we go. Fab. Right, so really, I've got a brilliant task of introing, I guess, what, as Jules mentioned, is a pretty complex policy picture at the moment, and has been for a while, but a very, very exciting one. Yeah, I usually just go by M to make life easier. I'm a policy manager at the Urban Transport Group, and I lead on our devolution work. So today, just really going to try and quickly run through where we are, well, I guess who we are as UTG, where we've got to and how we've got there, and I guess that specific focus on rail as well. So to start with UTG, we are the transport group, urban transport group, that don't let the urban sort of dictate what we do, because we really represent a whole host of those big transport authorities. So we used to be known as PTEG, the Passenger Transport Executive Group. So really built upon those big sort of starting blocks of in the devolution journey. We do so we represent them, we bring them together in sort of professional networks, we speak on behalf of them, and try and encourage them to learn from each other, and do sort of purposeful policy and leadership stuff as well. This is the picture of where we are now, with our membership. So you can see covers quite a chunky bit of that devolution landscape, and the whole country as well. We've got most of the MCAs currently in England, apart from some of the very, very newest ones, and we've got also excellent members in Transport for Wales, SBT in Scotland, and TransLink in Northern Ireland. So really a whole host of sort of knowledge sharing and experience. So the Transport Devo journey. So I guess today, as a starter, I guess what I mean devolution in this sense, I'm mostly going to be focusing on England. Whilst obviously the journey there is quite a bit different in the devolved nations. So really, I'm not going to talk you through every single sort of point here. It was really just to say, this journey has been going on for a significant time. We've heard the sort of terms devolution, revolution from every single government, I think, for the last few decades. Back to the journey. Not lots of interesting stuff. This is an excerpt from a report that I did, I think, last year now, on sort of setting out the journey and where we're going. Lots of interesting bits here, I guess. Just to note, really, I could have gone quite a bit further back into that map. One of my favourite little tidbits of info is who else but Winston Churchill was one of the first people in Parliament who spoke about regional devolution. So there's quite a bit of interesting stuff there, but it's really to show you how convoluted the journey's been as well, right? So with the transport passenger executive creation and sort of London's own journey, what really the last 2 decades have been is about putting bits of puzzle pieces together. So one deal at a time, really, and sort of negotiation-based deals of scraping for bits of funding, bits of power, and that's been the case sort of up until really sort of early to 2020s, when there was an idea of sort of formalising. I'm sure the idea with Heseltine Review was before that, but formalising an approach to really regional devolution in England. We've gone from 3 levels to 4 levels to now another slightly different 3 levels. So it's all a bit confusing, but in effect, I think the takeaway here is we've gone from negotiation-based, place-based deals that are very specific and sort of born out of a lot of politicking about, to a point where we now have a devolution bill, and we now have 14 metro mayors, as they're called. And there's some other mayors as well, sort of in cities and towns, but the big sort of regional mayors, there on that map, you see those are divided by parties. I'm sure you'll be aware. That picture is now a bit more colourful than it was a couple of years ago, and yeah, definitely led to some more interesting conversations, I guess. But really, what the devolution bill and the devolution white paper that was released last December now, gosh, a year ago. The point was to establish that new approach. So moving away from deals based to sort of devolution by default. There is obviously some disagreement in local government of enforced devolution versus sort of, stepping forward. That's a whole different conversation, sort of with reorganisation as well. But it really is standardising it, an approach. So current deals, current MCAs, they would have probably up to like 100 bits of SIs and orders that would all come together and create the framework on which they work with powers and funding approaches. So this is really a bid to sort of standardize where we are now and where we're going with a specific new framework of three strategic authorities, types of authorities rather. And then all the whole country fitting under one of those, and with that big goal from this government to finish that devolution map. So another really important part of the devolution bill and where we're going forwards is a right to request. So up until now, that sort of begging bowl politics has not just been for funding, but also for powers. It's been a lot of sort of politicking and having relationships up in government to ask for specific powers. There's now, through the new Devo bill, is going to be a new approach to sort of enabling mayors to ask for things. I mean, it's still going to be a bit convoluted. You sort of submit your request. Government has 6 months to respond, but they have to respond, and then sort of set out why not if it's a no. And so the assumption is it's devolution by default unless we find issues. So you can finish the thought there yourselves of whether Treasury will be happy with everything on a list. And yeah, obviously new wide-ranging competencies sort of again standardizing that approach. There'll be up until now mayors that can exercise certain competencies, others that can't, certain mayors that could raise levies on and borrowing powers on those competencies. So that sort of general standardization, which is absolutely very, very welcome. Really quickly, I also wanted to touch on something probably the most important part of all of this. Transport was obviously underpinned sort of devolution journey in England for those decades, but the significant move over the last decade has been on funding. So there's a nice little visualization of where we've come to currently. So again, sort of bits of different legislation there scattered around, but we've gone on a journey to now arrive at integrated settlements and quite a lot more flexibility from a point of sort of a bit more than a decade ago, where through those deals there were a bit more flexibility, a bit more freedom to use money that was given to cities at that point with a lot of strings attached, with a lot of very specific guidance, a lot of convoluted bidding processes as well, and then also really important to know, only capital money. So you effectively, the government trusts you to build a project that you've agreed specifically through major sort of boards and guidances and agreements, and sort of homework marking. City, so CRSDS, the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, I think was one of the big turning points really in the journey. So a 5-year settlement, that long-term certainty, a bit of revenue money as well to enable the capacity building in these big new authorities, and crucially a bit more money to do to build things, to think more long term, to integrate what you're doing locally. And that was sort of the building block on which we've arrived now in integrated settlement. So 2 areas, West Midlands and Greater Manchester, have sort of already been in that system. Greater Manchester to a bit more of an extent, given their big sort of billion monies were included the last year. But now with next April, there's going to be 6 areas, the sort of most mature, the so-called established mayoral combined authorities, mayoral strategic authorities, sorry, that will be receiving integrated settlement. So again, a really, really interesting point now, where sort of the trailblazer, so-called devolution areas have arrived at a point where they get to have these pots of money sort of combined and given a lot more flexibility over how they move that money around. So I've listed there the sort of themes under which they will be given funding. Worth noting that transport is the most significantly biggest pot out of all of these. The others, sort of adult skills, health, wellbeing, all of that is significantly less of that is devolved to mayors. I mean, obviously, we're at the start of this sort of new funding approach as well. So the hope is there'll be lots more. But the crucial bit there is the ability to move funding around. between those themes. So it depends on the mayor's priorities. So you don't sort of need to be stuck necessarily. You still have a number at the end of the day for an integrated settlement, and that those numbers I should have updated have now been determined through the spending review and the autumn budget and confirmed. The ability to move capital and revenue funding interchangeably, obviously at a cap of 10%, but still, that the sort of capital rich revenue pool concern that mayoral combined authorities have had, and also retain schemes. So even through the CRSDS process, and now it's not as if those MCAs have sort of complete freedom. So any project that they're in sort of that they deliver through these funding pots that goes above 200 million is effectively still half government, half them. So there's sort of funding boards and a lot more oversight and homework marking and business cases and more of that engagement, because it's seen more of a nationally strategic important project in that case. So still, bits of oversight, but definitely a lot more flexibility in that long-termism. Really important part, and a completely new set of sort of that in that relationship between local government and central government is accountability. And with integrated settlements and sort of just combining pots also for those outside of IS, it's outcomes framework. So trying to keep places accountable for delivery on sort of outcomes and indicators and outputs agreed on a higher level. So the sort of a reporting mechanism every 6 months or so. So intended to end up with a bit less of homework marking, and sort of agreement of we're here to deliver a common outcome. Currently sort of negotiations ongoing, and it's been quite interesting and has obviously really highlighted some of those pressures between local government and central government of, how can we sign up to a target on a specific outcome if we don't have all the money, all the powers and so on. So once this is sort of established as an accountability network, definitely an interesting sort of case to look to whether it works as intended and how we can develop in that accountability part. Worth noting on that last bit as well. So this sort of accountability is going to be extended to all local transport authorities. So, when I'm talking about the big beasts of sort of MSAs, they will have targets attached that they have to work towards, but that accountability outcomes framework will be to all local transport authorities starting from next April. So again, that really new type of relationship between national government and local government. Right, getting to actual, probably the most interesting bit of all of this for those in the room, rail. So obviously with the movement of devolution, rail has really been the sort of stuff sitting in a shelf in a too difficult bit. But we've arrived now at the point where we have a rail bill, and I guess the English devolution white paper that I mentioned, released last year as well, highlighted how much that rail bill and the rail devolution agenda will matter for MSAs going forward. So I've just sort of I've picked out an oversight of really how MSAs are to be integrated into the GBR new approach. I'm not going to talk through all of it. You can see, I'm sure we can share the slides, but really it's to say that for the first time, there's a bit more of a formalized relationship again. The statutory provisions, could they go further? Absolutely. We're doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes to say strengthening words and beyond guidance and so on. But those duties to consult or cooperate, to work with mayors and to listen to them is really, really important, and sort of really sets out that new path. At the flux of it, it's really what an MSA chooses to do with that newfound power, funding that we talked about before in what is called GBR partnerships. So I put on the slide here really what is the guide to what's available, what's the menu, what's what, based on your ambition, based on your capability, MSAs have available to them. So, you know, you go from a point of all sort of local regional engagement to collaborating to investing to local commissioning to fully devolved. So fully devolved is the sort of Merseyrail TfL model that is sort of completely outside the carved out stuff that has a specific set of guidance and a carve out in legislation. The rest of it is based mostly on those sort of partnership arrangements. So GBR working really closely with an MSA to agree the basis on which they would sort of work on what those ambitions are. So there's a lot of sort of work currently going on with Tom and colleagues as well there over what that means, what the guidance is, what those partnerships actually look like, and crucially, how can they be, you know, respected, I guess, once past an expiry date of a single government, right? The bill is really important, really significant, but if we leave most of these relationships and devolution initiatives in guidance, you know, that's the bit that is easy enough to change for whomever. So a really, really exciting point of sort of working together. Early days yet, specifically in rail. I think there's a lot of thinking yet to do of how this works in practice, and how you can marry a mayor's and an MSA's ambition versus the sort of shackles sometimes of a nationalised railway. Yeah, so that's, I believe, all from me in terms of slides. That was a lot. Hopefully, most of it made sense. More than happy to take questions, though.
Thanks so much, Monta. That was incredibly helpful to have that all that insight and knowledge shared. What a brilliant overview. So we've got a 10-minute question and answer session now before we specifically for Monta before we move on to our other speakers, and I'm really pleased to see that some hands are going up already. So just a reminder to please tell us who you are and keep it fairly succinct, please. But I can see that Peter West, you've got your hand up if you'd like to come in.
Thanks, Jules, and Monta, thanks so much. Absolutely fascinating. I'm Peter West. I'm a director at the Sevenside Community Rail Partnership, which covers Bristol and the wider Bristol area, which is obviously a member of your organisation. You gave us a marvellous overview. Would it be possible before you leave just to show us the last but one slide again, because necessarily with the time constraints you had to rather rush through that, but it was all fascinating. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy to. I can try and actually post that table. I'm assuming you're talking about the sort of the rail bill specifically. I can try and post that table in the chat. There you go. So you can have a read at your own leisure, but I'm sure we can share the slides as well.
Yeah, I think I mentioned right at the start, we will we'll circulate the slides to all attendees, so you'll be able to digest further afterwards. Thank you, Peter. Paul Bromley, would you like to come in?
Yep. Hi there. Morning, everyone. Paul Bromley from South Communities Rail Partnership. So that does cover Sussex, which was part of the Devolution Priority Programme, since been delayed. And I think I was one of the ones that was asking for this webinar. My background is as a local government political and parliamentary reporter. So I've been reporting on this issue for a long time. So I understand a lot of the acronyms and jargon that you and others use, but I'm sure not everyone does. So I was just going to ask, would it be helpful if alongside this, which is something that I produced separately, is a jargon buster to explain what all these terms mean? Because I don't think everyone knows the difference between an MCA and an MSA. You refer to capital and revenue expenditure as well, the city regional figures. There was STBs, which I'm not sure what that is. There are a lot of terms in there that I don't think ordinary community rail people and the volunteers would understand where they are in the process and how we can engage. It is very complex, and I just think a simple jargon buster or explanation would be really helpful to help us negotiate or navigate our way through the process over the next few years.
No, absolutely. That's a very good point. The thing is, the more you spend time with people that sort of just interchangeably use random letters, the more it seems normal, but it very much is not. That's absolutely fine. I'll share also. I've got a bit of a deeper dive but high level thing of a report as well that sort of goes into a bit more detail of what I've said today. So hopefully it might be useful. But absolutely a good point. I could probably assemble a list, but to explain the difference between an MSA and an MCA and an MSA. Wow, that's a sort of an essay type question. But yes, that's a very good point.
It's been a rapidly evolving picture as well, hasn't it? So some of these acronyms they've come about fairly recently, but I think what we can do. So I mentioned that we will be looking to run further webinars, but we're also interested in other tools and materials that we can provide to members on this topic. So I think we'll also liaise with Monta and Paul. You said you've got something that you might be able to share with us. Maybe we'll look at whether we can put together a special jargon buster or something like that for members, perhaps summarising some of these key points and where we're up to, what it all means. But thank you for that. Malcolm, do you want to come in?
Hello, I'm Malcolm Cheney from the Tyne Valley Community Rail Partnership, so Newcastle, Carlisle. Just a couple of perhaps more practical points. The North East Combined Authority, as I'm sure Dawn will tell us, wants to be part of a partnership that has a meaningful influence on rail services. There are railway lines and railway lines. The intercity line running north and south will be considerably more difficult to do anything with than, say, ours is, where there's really only one train operator and some freight. So I suspect it will be much harder to have any meaningful influence on the East Coast Main Line, simply because it's full. The other practical problem is that the railway is hugely expensive to operate. So you get a lot less transport capability for your money than you do with a bus. So the temptation will always be with the budgets that whatever kind of mayoral authority it is has, that it will be able to do less with the railway than it will with other modes of transport. The railways bill is conspicuously silent on that point, and the Secretary of State has been trying to manage expectations of significantly cheaper fares away from public consciousness. But I think that cost issue has to be faced head on, because if it isn't, any rational authority is going to spend its money where it gets the most output from, and the railways will not prosper in that situation.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. Is that, yeah? So I, on a personal note, agree absolutely with the observation. I guess from a UTG standpoint, the funding piece in the railways bill is something we are slightly concerned with. I guess as you rightly mentioned, there is sort of, there's a clause that contains provisions to for MSAs for MSAs to really effectively pay to GBR to run in partnerships, but not vice versa. So there is no provision currently to sort of carve out or get more fiscal devolution, so more of that money for through those relationships to for that local decision making and local funding and investment. So definitely a concern. I think what I would say in the sort of what's cheaper and easier to run, I think my members are really now focused on, rightly so, trying to think integrated, right, rather than how do I fund bus or light rail or train, which fair enough still has to be a consideration, but how does that ecosystem, how does that integrated network work together, and in effect, not to use that word, but cross subsidize if needs be, same as we've arrived sort of in the bus sector as well. So I guess it's the big picture thinking. But you're right, railways, because they've been missing out as a piece of we'll deal with it later, it's a bit too complicated, is the biggest beast now to deal with. So yeah, quite a lot of big thinking still left to do, but also for government to commit to giving a bit more money and a bit more flexibility there.
Thank you for that. I think that was some really interesting points coming forward there, and perhaps Monta, actually there's an action for Community Rail Network to pick up in having a further conversation with UTG about some of your concerns around the funding piece within the Railways Bill, and for us to better understand that and perhaps add in our views. But I think the point about, as I think probably all members and our team members around the table will recognise, we've put a huge amount of effort into positioning community rail as a really powerful force in eking out greater value from the railways. So I think continuing to kind of get across the way that the way that community rail can do that, I think, is really important in our engagement with devolved authorities, and really critical to that point about holistic thinking about the whole transport network, and not just thinking about rail, but how can we join rail up better to create better value for local communities and make improvements there. And again, I think that's a growing role that we've seen community rail playing. So I think we could probably have a whole webinar talking about that and community rail's role in regards to creating more joined up transport networks linked in with the process of devolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I just wanted to say, I've just dropped, in terms of like the bill and our thoughts as UTG and our members, just dropped a link there for those the keenest ones amongst you. There's our Transport Select Committee submission there that we sort of go through what we think, well, our members think about the bill, and where it might be missing some action. So if of interest, and then definitely happy to follow up. As you say, I think the on the ground beyond legislative and these big words and acronyms, it's how do we make, that bit of cycle scheme, this bit of a local initiative, and then a major sort of multi-billion scheme work together is where it's at. And I don't think we've cracked it yet. So we're all in it together.
Indeed, yeah, and as we've said already, it's a really complex picture and huge variations across different areas, and as Malcolm says, between different railway lines as well. So lots of interesting diagrams have been popped into the chat, and yeah, as Monta says, that link through to the UTG commentary on the Railways Bill, really helpful. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions before we move on? I can't see any questions in the chat. Lots of useful information and links, but just a quick check before we hand over to our next speaker. We will have another Q&A session a bit later on, but I think I will say thank you so much to Monta. Monta is staying with us for the whole session, aren't you? Thank you. But I'm now going to hand you all over to Tom Painter, who is General Manager at the West Midlands Rail Executive and Head of Rail for Transport for the West Midlands. Gosh, that's a long and multifaceted job title. And I'm hoping, Tom, that you have managed to address your tech issues that you've been having this morning.
Well, we will find out in the next 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Alice is on standby. Alice is on standby with the deck in case my technical gremlins continue into the morning. But yeah, hi everyone. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for the introduction, Jules, and thank you, Monta, as well for setting the scene so well. Technically, I suppose I'm actually here wearing a third hat. Because as well as my paid employment, I'm also the chair of a community rail partnership, the Worcestershire Community Rail Partnership. So after I finish speaking, I'm going to take my work hat off, put my community rail hat on. I'm going to ask myself some very challenging questions. But I'll load up the presentation. Brilliant. So hopefully I'll go into presentation mode and we'll all be able to follow. Brilliant. Is that all working for everybody?
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. I can't see any of you now. So if there are any hands and things like that, if I could ask someone to be my eyes and ears and let me know. Okay, right, brilliant. So I've been invited to come along today and talk about devolution in action, lessons from the West Midlands. And the West Midlands has had an active role in the rail industry, really going back a very long time. But for the purposes of today, I'll really be talking from 1968 onwards. 1968, Transport Act led to the formation of the passenger transport executives, who have evolved in many cases into the mayoral combined authorities that make up the urban transport group. The membership is now much broader than the former passenger transport executives, which is really good. But yeah, they're the West Midlands, West Yorkshire, North East, Greater Manchester, for example. So my organisation, though, is actually slightly broader than just the former passenger transport executive and the combined authority. The West Midlands Rail Executive is a regional body covering the whole of the wider West Midlands. And you might wonder, well, why is that the case? And hopefully the answer is revealed by the map on the right-hand side of this slide, because that map shows the local and regional rail network in the West Midlands. The orange lines are those local and regional rail routes, and the green lines are the West Coast main line, so the more intercity route. And what that map shows you is that pretty much every single one of those orange lines starts, finishes, or both outside of the mayoral combined authority. The mayoral combined authority, West Midlands combined authority, being that sort of tight knot of 7 councils in the centre of the screen there: Birmingham, Solihull, Coventry, and then in the Black Country you've got Wolverhampton, Walsall, Sandwell, and Dudley. So back in the mid-2010s, when the region was invited by the government to submit proposals for rail devolution, the very sensible red line was set by government, which is that devolution wouldn't be granted to the West Midlands unless the West Midlands found a way of organising itself to make it politically contiguous with the West Midlands rail network. If you didn't, you could end up with absolutely absurd situations where decisions were made about services up until a certain point in their journey, until they passed through a political boundary, and that would have ramifications and impacts for people who lived further on the line. It just wouldn't be a sensible way to run a network. So that led to us being formed in the way we are today. Despite being a regional organisation, we do also exercise the West Midlands Combined Authority's rail responsibilities, and we are chaired by the Mayor of the West Midlands Combined Authority. When it comes to community rail, we are members of 2 community rail partnerships: Worcestershire, which is the one I chair, and also Heart of England, which covers Warwickshire and Coventry. We're also the host of the Worcestershire Community Rail Partnership, and we'd love to see more of the wider West Midlands filled in with community rail, whether that's more adoptions, whether that's community rail partnerships, or maybe a new model that is yet to be designed. So what do we do? Well, we jointly with DfT specify and manage the local rail contract that's currently operated by the private sector. It will, on the 1st of February, transfer to a publicly owned company as part of the government's nationalisation programme. We're working with Great British Railways on what our future role will look like, and I'll speak much more about that in the slides that follow this one. But elsewhere, we've been building new stations, refurbishing others. And we're very heavily involved in rail strategy, in fares reform, and also big sort of strategic enhancement schemes like the Midlands Rail Hub, which is about providing a bit of extra infrastructure in central Birmingham that would alleviate pressure on Birmingham New Street and enable lots of new exciting journey opportunities to be created from Birmingham to the southwest, to the East Midlands, and so on. So, in terms of what I'm going to talk to you about today, when I was thinking about how to answer the question posed to me by Jules and Sarah, I thought really it's best to break it down as follows. So, first of all, how has rail devolution in the West Midlands changed as the rail industry has changed? And what can we learn from the past about how much influence different arrangements have given us? So what follows is going to be some sort of animated sort of charts to try and bring this question to light. Now, I know there are one or two people on the call who are probably even better versed in rail industry organisation than I am. I have sort of simplified things in one or two places just for ease of display. So please go easy on me if I haven't quite represented something 100% accurately. Right, so we'll start really with the nationalised rail industry prior to 1993. It was all rather straightforward. You had the government who would set funding and outputs for British Rail. Of course, British Rail integrated track and train, and British Rail had through the British Railways Board accountability back to government for delivering what it was asked to or funded to deliver. Then our forebears, Centro, the passenger transport executive, raised local funding through something called the transport levy. It's a kind of a precept on council tax, basically, in the 7 council areas that form the Centro area, now West Midlands Combined Authority area. And then Centro would use that funding to buy outputs from British Rail. And in return, British Rail would have accountability back to Centro. This was all formalised through something called a Section 20 agreement. So if anyone thinks that kind of legal agreements were something that only were created at privatisation, that's not the case at all. They did exist prior to privatisation, and here's an example of where they did. And how that manifests itself, well, that picture of the top right-hand corner shows you that Centro's livery was carried on trains. Centro was taking a degree of revenue risk. And it had control over levers like marketing and the timetable and things like that, and of course branding. So in terms of kind of what amount of control did local people have through their elected representatives at this time? Well, I think our estimation is that actually pretty high, and you'll see our little fancy dial at the bottom right-hand side there. We've put it in the green on the green category. So British Rail found accountable to Centro. It was a sole supplier, but funding could be withheld under that Section 20 agreement if British Rail didn't deliver on what Centro was buying. And as I mentioned, key decisions about fares, investment, service levels. Centro had a strong voice and say in all of those things. And I use Centro as an example here. This slide would look almost identical if we were talking about, say, West Yorkshire or Greater Manchester during this period. So then what happened? Well, we know that privatisation, of course, occurred in the mid-90s. And as part of that, rail infrastructure and rail operations were separated. Originally, Railtrack for rail infrastructure and various train operating companies. In our case, the main one was Central Trains. I think it was owned by National Express at that time. And then if we move through the privatisation period, I've broadly categorised this as 1990s to 2007. You had the Office of Rail Regulation, Rail Regulator created. Yeah, the Office of Passenger Rail Franchising, OPRAF, created. And essentially, what this is showing is kind of the accountability and money merry-go-round with government through the Office of Passenger Rail Franchising, specifying the outputs for the franchises and the funding agreements with them. The train operators, the franchisees, then had track access agreements with the rail infrastructure provider Railtrack, and there's accountability that flowed through that as well. And then, of course, there was accountability from the infrastructure provider to the Office of the Rail Regulator. The Office of the Rail Regulator would set the sort of 5-year funding settlement for Railtrack, and that in turn would inform the track access charges. There are many other lines I could have drawn on this, but appreciate it's already quite busy. So where did local bodies like Centro fit into all this? Well, they received a special rail grant from the government, and they were granted co-signatory status of the franchises. So those Section 20 agreements were sort of morphed into something slightly different, but they did similar things. So it gave Centro a contractual relationship over the operator of the train service, which could be enforced in the event of poor performance. So Centro continued to have a key role in making the big decisions about service levels, about fares, about marketing, about branding, etc., which of course are absolutely key to drive the outcomes for the wider region. So we call what happened in 2007 to 2017 the wilderness years. The 2005 Transport Act removed co-signatory status from all the passenger transport executives, including Centro, which at this point rebranded itself as Network West Midlands. So the special rail grant went, and you can see OPRAF, and I could have put Strategic Rail Authority in there as well. They also went, and it was a more direct relationship between government and the train operators. In our case, London Midland had succeeded Central Trains as the franchisee in the West Midlands. And really, in terms of what local sort of accountability and control existed, really it was extremely minimal. We had a partnership agreement with train operator London Midland, but as the name would suggest, that was purely voluntary. There was no jeopardy in there for the train operator, and no ability for Centro to compel any action for them. Soft power, political power was kind of the best anyone could hope for, and really sort of very little progress was made during that time as a consequence. And co-signatory status is something that was lost for all the passenger transport executives. So again, I use this as an example from the West Midlands. You could easily apply this to the other passenger transport executives for this period of time as well. So then what happened in 2017? So we had another change in franchise operator. This time West Midlands Trains succeeded London Midland, and the West Midlands Rail Executive was formed. And the West Midlands Rail Executive entered into a collaboration agreement with the Department for Transport. And what that basically did was give the West Midlands Rail Executive some of that franchise co-signatory status back, but not in completely the same way. The franchise was still bilateral between the private sector train operator and the DFT, but the collaboration agreement said that the West Midlands Rail Executive would exercise some of its powers on its behalf. So we've kind of said that we've moved the dial from red to orange, but we're not in the green. It did enable us to re-establish ourselves with a formal contractual role, but I think what really stymied us was the pandemic and the move away from franchising to the emergency measures and then emergency recovery measures agreements that the train operators were moved on to. That placed all the cost and revenue risk with government. So the scope for autonomy from the train operators was severely curtailed, but so too was a scope for autonomy from ourselves as part of that process. So if you probably asked me this question before 2020, I would have sort of nudged that dial into the green. But because of what happened post-pandemic, that's why we've put the dial of control firmly in the orange. So to finish off, then, to look into the future. Now, this slide was written before, of course, some of the Railways Bill information was revealed. But we know, of course, that Great British Railways is planned to be created, bringing track and train together. And government will set the outputs and funding, and there will be accountability from Great British Railways back to the government. And then, of course, the big question is, what about local bodies like West Midlands Rail Executive? What about the role of the ORR, the rail regulator? I think we actually know more about the answer to that question. Still need to do a lot more work to understand the role, though, of the organisation on the right that I work for. So what lessons have we learnt from all this then that would be relevant to our ongoing conversations with Great British Railways about a future role for local democratically accountable bodies? Well, our view is that a formal contractual relationship with the rail industry is essential to make sure the railway takes account of local objectives and plans. That was true in the British Rail era with those Section 20 agreements. So I think that means that it's never quite as simple as saying you only need those kind of agreements when you're dealing with the private sector. They were needed when it was British Rail. So I don't think it means there's any reason why something similar couldn't exist in the future. We did have a period of about 10 years where things were done on a partnership and a purely voluntary basis. And our view is very strongly that didn't really work. So we are yet to be persuaded by some of the aspects of the partnership framework that Monta showed you right at the end of her presentation that suggests that a lot can actually be achieved without having to enter into any kind of formal relationships. Our experience tells us that kind of when things are going well, that's absolutely fine. But actually when things start to get tough and you need to make some difficult trade-offs, you do need something a little bit more formalized. And that's essentially the point that's on the screen here. And we are now trying to unravel some of the decisions that were made in that 2007-2017 period that we had no ability to really influence. That are now causing us a lot of problems in the future. Decisions that were made for usually short-term reasons to boost the profitability of the private sector operators that now are coming home to roost. We are very, very keen to emphasise the importance of regional accountability, feeling that the rail industry needs to feel accountable to the region. If there's one thing you want to say that will trigger us, call us a stakeholder. We are, I think, see ourselves as partners to the rail industry, helping the rail industry deliver, and also the rail industry helping us to deliver the outputs and outcomes that the region needs. I think it's very, very good that the model that the rail industry is looking to introduce through its reforms will reinstate a stronger sense of accountability from the rail industry to government. That's great. It's something we're lacking at the moment. But I think that accountability also needs to be more regionally focused. I don't think it is just possible for the Secretary of State to ultimately be accountable for what is being delivered in sort of far-flung parts of the network in the West Midlands, and I think that's true of the network as a whole. We see ourselves as being on a trajectory. We were reversing so the trend from 2007 to 2017, where there was a loss of influence, trying to reinstate it, and we feel like we built up quite a strong track record of success over the period between 2017 and today. That hopefully means we'll have the capability to take on a greater degree of local control through the rail reform process. We think that our wider geography is one of our strengths. It does align political, rail, and economic geographies. Not to say that anybody else's geography is the wrong one, but we do think that, at least in the West Midlands, trying to focus things narrowly on just the West Midlands Combined Authority area will be the wrong way to go. And it will actually mean a loss of a voice for people in the wider West Midlands area who aren't currently within a combined authority. And we're very, very keen that future rail industry governance does have a strong regional presence for that region. I think the wrong outcome would be a centralised Great British Railways. Clearly, there will still need to be some centrally retained network-wide functions. But actually moving decision making as close to the customers and communities as possible is, in our view, the best way to make the best decisions and ensure the best possible value is returned to those regional areas and also the wider UK economy. And finally, I think we think there is strong evidence that you are going to get more investment by local bodies when it has a greater role in the rail industry. Monta talked about integrated settlements and things like that. It's fantastic to see all that money coming into local areas, but those local areas will now have to decide where they spend that money. And there will be questions like, do you spend that money on metro schemes? Do you spend that money on bus schemes? Do you spend that money on active travel schemes? Or do you spend that money on rail schemes? If you have control over your bus network, if you have control over your metro network, you have control over your active travel network, but you don't have control over the rail network, you can see how you might be more inclined to spend your integrated settlement on something other than rail. Rail needs to make sure it is open for business, it is outward facing, it is investable to those people who are now in receipt of these sums of money. So that's those are my sort of lessons from the West Midlands regarding devolution. I will stop there and hopefully there'll be lots of questions.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was really interesting. We have got a Q&A session after our next speaker, so I'm going to hand straight over to Dawn Badminton Caps, who's Head of Rail Partnerships at the North East Combined Authority. Over to you, Dawn, and everyone, please do hold on to your questions for the Q&A session afterwards.
Thanks, Jules, and hopefully the gremlins that Tom has experienced, I will not experience, and hopefully Tom and I will be complementary in our presentations, seeing as we seem to be on a lot of groups having very similar conversations. Is that appearing for everybody?
Yeah, looks good.
Fabulous. And as mentioned, those are people. Tom? Yeah, no, you're waving at me.
I was just saying
okay.
Yes, it is.
Fabulous. Apologies. Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Community Rail Network and partners, for inviting me to speak to you all this morning. I think we're at a real pivotal point in the industry, and this is such a game changer for what we do and how we move forward. So yeah, I'm Dawn Badminton Caps and I'm Head of Rail Partnerships at the North East Combined Authority. And yes, please focus on my job title, as I believe rail partnerships is the key we all need to take away from rail reform and the Railways Bill. So it's purposeful, I believe, giving me that title. Okay, so for those of you, and Malcolm, you can close your ears because I know you'll know all this. But for those of you that don't know the North East, I need to tell you a bit more about the amazing region that I work in. We are a combined authority which is made up of 7 local authorities, with County Durham in our south, bordering Tees Valley Combined Authority. Northumberland is in the north of our area, and that borders with Scotland, which obviously has its own arrangement for transport and for rail. And then to the west, we have Cumbria. So, and then obviously to the east, we have the sea, which obviously gives us all sorts of other interesting opportunities as well. As a region, we are just over 2 million people in population. And over 90% of those residents live in the larger towns and cities. So we have huge rural areas that are not well serviced by any kind of public transport. In terms of geographical size, we are more akin with Wales. Not only because we have lots of rural areas and green spaces. I don't think we have a lot of sheep, and apologies to those who are from Wales, but we are a very big region. So we are very different to the forerunners of West Midlands and Greater Manchester in how we have to look at our region and what we aim to address. We have the East Coast Main Line running right through our region, which brings both advantages and disadvantages. How do we manage that in rail reform, and what do we do? We have 4 train operating companies operating in the region, 3 of which are publicly owned. so they are already part of DFTO. And as you can see on that slide, we are at almost 90 million journeys in the year from last year. That is up by 20% from pre-pandemic levels. So we're proud of that. I think that signals to us that we need to invest in rail. That signals to us that DFT and GBR need to invest in rail in our region. If we're really truly aiming for growth, then we're already starting to see that, and we want to see more of that. We're also lucky enough to have the Tyne and Wear Metro in our region, which services communities around Newcastle and Sunderland, two of our main cities. And then also we have 2 community rail partnerships in our region as well, who have won many awards over the years, do a significant amount of work, and really are the eyes and ears in our region. And do so much to kind of keep us on track, I think, and almost as a CA, to my mind, hold us to account, which I feel that should be their role. That one of those CRPs is also providing advice and support to establish a new community rail partnership in our region as part of our newly open Northumberland line as well. So not only are we trying to grow, but so are they. So one of the key points coming out of the railway bill for me, which is something important to know, is that GBR will have to work with MSAs or mayoral strategic authorities to deliver their local transport plan. A key document not only for what it means for rail, but also what it means for integrated transport across our region. In our region, our LTP was published this year following Cabinet approval at March Cabinet. And as a CA, we placed really high value on public and community engagement, which meant we had an unprecedented 16,000 people respond to our consultation, something we are incredibly proud of. During those 16,000 people responding, we also targeted not only communities, but people. So I think it's 49% of respondents were women. So we really pushed to get proper representation of people responding to that consultation, as opposed to what some of you might know can sometimes feel like a bit of a tick box exercise. Our LTP is structured around 5 key areas: journey planning and customers support, ticketing and fares, expanding infrastructure and making it more resilient, enhancing safety, especially for women and girls, and improving links between different modes of transport. And like Tom already reflected, our LTP is mode agnostic in its approach and what we're trying to deliver. So those themes are things that we think we can apply to all modes. We've been working very closely with the GBR mayoral partnerships team, and it has become apparent to us that for us to do business with GBR, we need more than our local transport plan. We need to set a clear vision for what we want for rail in the region. So using our LTP, we're aiming to articulate what we want for rail in each of those 5 key focus areas. So to do this, we've set up a steering group, which crucially involves representation from our community rail partnership. That steering group is providing advice on what we should include in our rail and what communities want to see from us. But even with rail reform looming over us, we can't wait. We have to get on and we have to do things now. We're a CA that's only 18 months old. We're toddling along, desperately trying to make improvements and catch up with the others. So we've got no time to hit pause and wait for rail reform or the railway bill. We've got to crack on and start delivering stuff. And in the last year, we have reopened the Northumberland line, which is transformational for our region in connecting southeast Northumberland into Newcastle. In under a year, we've not even hit the year mark yet. We have had 800,000 passenger journeys on that line, which is outperforming the business case by between 15 and 20%. It's absolutely amazing. And if you ever have the joy of being in Newcastle between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning, what you will see is passengers getting off that train that are predominantly young people going to education and college and things of that nature. These are new customers that we are bringing into the rail network and getting them to travel around the region. But not only that, we have managed to secure an extra service on our Durham coastline, which has been a long-term ambition. I think things in rail move quite slowly, sometimes probably too slowly for all of us. So we are getting a second service, which will give a semi-fast service moving up the coast, and again through Sunderland and into Newcastle, moving more people to where they want to be. We have created our North East Rail Partnership Board, which is the start of our partnership with Great British Railway. And on that board sits our mayor as chair, but also our TOCs, Network Rail, and other significant others. My colleagues at Nexus who run our metro would absolutely kill me if I didn't mention that we have 20 new trains in service and expected to have full rollout in 2026. It's been a painful process, but we own that network and we own those trains. As a trailblazing CA, we've also been able to secure 8.5 billion of Transport for City Regions funding. Amazing. We'll be able to start to do other infrastructure projects such as the Metro to Washington, which is key to us. But as other colleagues has alluded to, 8.5 billion looks a lot on paper, but it don't go far when you're doing transport, and it certainly doesn't go far when you want to deliver rail projects. So we've got big challenges ahead to work through how we're going to spend that money and where it's going to most hit our communities and make the improvements that we want to see. So we are setting priorities for ourselves, and those are about increasing local service frequency so that rail can become a more viable choice in our region. It's about full integration, coordinated timetables, integrated ticketing, and having that brilliant customer experience that you expect. We want to support housing growth. So our growth strategy and our spatial strategy are really key to what we want to do in the region and how we will deliver things. And that's particularly important for another infrastructure project that is on the horizon for us, which is reopening the Leamside line. We want to deliver more capacity on the East Coast Main Line because, like I say, it is an excellent piece of rail network. But at the moment, it isn't doing what we need to do locally and regionally, and we need to address that. We want a safe network and we want to make our stations fully accessible because, as I mentioned, you saw the map where we have huge rural areas. Some of those stations have not been loved, looked after, or made accessible. And again, I know Malcolm will be able to comment on this as well. And we need to do work with GBR to make sure that that is addressed and improved. So like I say, within those ambitious priorities, we want to open another new railway line that was closed down in the Beeching cuts. And again, we want to take our community and we want to take our community rail network and our local community rail partners with us on the journey to support us with that. What this line would do for us and how we're positioning that as a national proposition with Network Rail and GBR is that line in purple there is the proposed Leamside line. The line in black is the East Coast Main Line. East Coast Main Line can only hold 6 trains per hour currently, and centrally government decided that they would give us an extra long distance high speed service. Fantastic, but that isn't doing what we need for people in our community, particularly people who live in Durham, Morpeth, or moving up into Northumberland. So what the Leamside line can do for us is, and what we're presenting to government is to say, here you go, support us to reopen this line and we'll create an extra 3 paths moving from Ferry Hill, which is not that far away from Darlington, up through past Newcastle. As a proposition, it makes complete sense to us, but we have to work really, really hard with GBR to get them to understand. And I tell you these things partly because I really do believe this is a once in a generation change, and we have a foundation around local needs and local ownership and what we want to do. And so my advice to all of the community rail partners on the call is to start looking at your mayors and your local leaders. Start to understand what their ambitions are and what their priorities are and how you can work with them, how you can support them, how you can influence and drive that change. Because I know in my region that the community rail partnerships are doing lots of amazing work. I know they would welcome that and encourage that. So please work in collaboration with your mayors and your regional CAs. And I put this picture in there just because even though we're looking forward and looking at a time of change, this is part of the Leenside line. It's the Victoria Viaduct, and it's in the infrastructure part of designing the business case. It's looked at as a bit of a barrier, but that is a Victorian piece of architecture that is still standing. And I think that gives us the opportunity to make change and look forward. We can put the foundations in place now. We have the opportunity. We need to grab hold of it and look at how we can all work together to make sure that the railway network in the next 100, 200 years is doing what we want to achieve. So in the North East, we welcome rail reform. Our mayor is keen to take back local controls where appropriate, and she is keen to hold GBR to account and ensure that GBR is doing what it should be doing to benefit the people and the communities in our region. So as mentioned, what we're doing is creating a North East Partnership Board, which is chaired by our mayor. That brings together on a quarterly basis Network Rail, senior leaders at Network Rail, GBR, Department for Transport, and the train operating companies, including DFTO. It's a strategic board which sets about to really start to influence how GBR design moves forward, what our arrangements would be, how we would work with GBR, but also because, as I've mentioned before, we don't want to wait for all that to happen. What can we do now? What are our short-term goals? What can we do around rail ticketing integration? We have our version of the Oyster card in the region. So what can we do with POP? What can we do around station accessibility, etc.? And how do we work with GBR to do that joint investment planning so that they understand our local transport plan and our vision for rail, and they can start to see how they can deliver that with us. And again, we've done partnership in our region for a number of years. Whilst we've created the partnership boards, we have lots of other forums where we engage and work with partners through either the combined authorities that sit either side of us or around us, how we work with community rail, how we work with Transport for the North as the sub-national body, etc. So we have the North East Rail Management Unit, which is locally called NERMU, which always makes me think of Wales. I don't know why, but it does. But that has passed its 100th meeting. It was the first business unit established by a local authority or a transport body in the country. And it's still going now after 100 meetings, and they look at performance, they look at operations, they look at strategy, and they come together as partners to look at all those things. Obviously, we also then work with Transport for the North and the Rail North Committee, and we look at things like timetabling. And as GBR becomes a proper organisation, we will be super keen on how we hold them almost to account, but how we work with GBR to make sure that things like timetabling, particularly on the East Coast Main Line, is actually advantageous to our region and not disadvantageous. And then, like I say, we work with our community rail partnerships as well. Because I think, like I say, from start to finish, the key to all this is working in partnership, and we can have lots of things in place. But I like to think that we will be able to move to a place moving forward where I can pick up the phone and say to the strategic director of GBR or the person that is in charge of my local business unit and say, we've got this problem here. How are you going to help me fix that? So that's all from me. The only thing I wanted to add to that is yesterday when Tom and I were at a UTG event and had lots of people talking to us from GBR from various places, we did challenge them on where Community Rail Network and where Community Rail Partners sat in all of this, because we're aware that at times you've possibly felt a bit disengaged or not involved. They were quick to respond to us, were they not, Tom, to tell us that they see a role for Community Rail Network and CRPs in the business units that will be created. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you more about what these business units are going to look like, how they're going to be formed and what they're going to do. But I can't, because it's such a moving beast at the moment. But I think what it was securing the knowledge is that you're not being forgot about as entities, and certainly from a North East point of view, you are certainly not forgot about, and we are very, very keen to work with you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That's a really reassuring message to finish with. And yeah, it certainly is a moving feast, as you say, in terms of the GBR design work going on. But we're certainly making sure that we're doing our best to make sure that we're at the table, or the multiple tables of in terms of all the discussions going on that. But fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. We're a little behind on the agenda, but I do want to make sure that we've got a decent amount of time for people to ask questions. So I will shrink back my closing remarks. I'm sure you won't be too disappointed about that. And so we have got some time for Q&A now. So please do put up your hands if you've got questions for Dawn or Tom. Questions, comments, thoughts, all are welcome. Peter, I think you went first last time, but thank you for putting your hand up. You there?
Hello, I suddenly reappeared. Hi. Sorry to be the first each time. Thanks to the contributors, absolutely fascinating, and I think some really interesting themes emerging in there. Most of the discussion has been perhaps inevitably, given the debate about the Railways Bill, and GBR. But we've also got, of course, the white paper on English devolution and the parallel movements there. There's become a bit of a commonplace, I think, in commentary that the GBR approach and the white paper approach and devolution don't quite fit with each other. And the white paper, I've read it a number of occasions, does really start with London, which is much further down the devolution path than even the big authorities we've been talking to today, and makes a lot about devolution, and it really pushes it quite hard. Given that devolution is a fundamental government restructuring, and in constitutional terms you might expect has got higher status than GBR creation, where is this little tussle going longer term?
Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? Tom, looks like you're happy to come in on that one. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'll do my best. I might need to sort of put my CRP hat on briefly so I can recuss myself and saying anything that might compromise me in my paid employment. It's a really good question. Peter. And Worcestershire CRP is, of course, in an authority that is a traditional two-tier post-1974 creation. The sort of authority that English Devolution Bill seeks to abolish and replace with one or more unitaries that then combine to form new combined authorities, or alternatively join existing combined authorities. And I know that's creating quite a lot of uncertainty in the county, and I'm sure that's creating lots of uncertainty in every other local authority that is not already a combined authority. There is, personally, I do have some concern about the connection that's being made between local sort of devolution in rail and the model of devolution more widely, because I think you only need to look back at that map that I showed you right at the start of my presentation to see that political geographies and rail geographies are rarely the same thing. In fact, I don't think there's a single local government geography that actually maps perfectly to a rail geography. Even in the northwest in Liverpool, which is extremely close, Merseyrail services go out into Cheshire for example. And of course, London famously goes into Buckinghamshire, into Essex, into the Thames Valley. So I think there are plenty of examples of where you can have meaningful local involvement in rail without having to have sort of a perfect alignment. And I think there's a danger that we could end up forcing ourselves down a line where we have to form sort of local government combinations that actually aren't really the right ones for wider outcomes of those regions, or probably more likely, because rail is not the #1 priority in local government reform, local government entities are formed through local government reform that actually don't lend themselves very well to rail devolution. Therefore, probably rail devolution won't really happen there, or if it does happen, it won't happen particularly well. So these are all points that we've been making as part of the rail reform agenda, because there is a risk that we see that a body like ours, which is regional, how does that fit with a devolution agenda that is very clearly focused on mayoral combined authorities? All our 14 partner authorities want to continue with this regional model. And I think if we were to see that argument and just see devolution granted to the mayoral combined authority, that would actually be anti-devolutionary in all those surrounding shire and unitary authorities. And that clearly can't be the government's intention. But that will be an unintended consequence if things continue to be pushed ahead in the way that they are being pushed ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Dawn, do you want to come in on that question at all? And can I just ask if anyone's got any other questions they want to ask? Please do put your hands up now so I can see how many more people are wanting to speak. But Dawn,
I haven't got much more to add to it. But what I am starting to hear, particularly through the forum we had yesterday and through some other forums, is that GBR design are recognizing that not one size fits all, and that's causing challenge how you present that in policy and in the railway bill, and I think that's why we've got some things feel a bit murky for us at the moment, and I'm not sure whether that's intentional so that we can set up what's right for us within regions or within areas, or whether it's because they haven't done the critical thinking yet. But I totally agree with Tom's comments, is that we can't throw baby out with the bathwater, and so we need to keep raising these challenges as we move through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Monta, do you want to come in on that question?
Really quickly, just to add to the murkiness, I think one of the things that we haven't spoken about, and I didn't because it's a bit even more complex, but it makes the picture, is subnational transport bodies and where those overlap within all of this. I've just posted a map in sort of a diagram in the comments. That's what the white paper thought the new sort of governance system would very simplify, in a simple way, look like. You know, what happens with Rail North and obviously with an SDB in the West Midlands as well. There's so much thinking in that space yet to happen, and it feels like 5 different thinking bits are happening at the same time and not necessarily joined up. So I think there's a lot of, like, as Tom and Dawn say, continuing to make the case and highlighting, like, hang on, have you thought about this and what about that? Because we're at a point where all of this has to be sort of figured out, but running out of time before we sort of lean into the challenge as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and obviously, you know, within Community Rail, we want to make sure, as we've said already, we're being thought about and considered within that broader picture, and making sure that as the dust starts to settle, we do have those routes in to be able to influence and to collaborate. Malcolm, do you want to come in? And I think that will be our final question, and then I will wrap up.
Just a few random thoughts, because really the information that's coming to me is random. There isn't a coordinated picture of how all of this is going to work. And the first place to look is the Railways Bill and the consultation on legislative aspects of rail reform that was held in the middle of this year, and the devolution picture. They simply don't match up. And the GBR picture comes down fairly firmly on the controlling mind controlling. So there seems to be much less scope for the devolved authorities to have that significant influence that they're seeking. From my standpoint, I would very much like to see the North East Combined Authority have that influence, because it's much closer to us. It talks to us, and we're much more likely to get a hearing from them than we are from DFT operator or GBR to come. But I think the government needs to come down one side or the other, because at the moment, presumably two different government departments have a completely different view of how this is going to work. In my dealings with what was then the GBR transition team, and people at CRN will know about this because they organised one of the sessions with Rufus Boyd. He was quite dismissive of TFN, and his advice to me personally was talk to the combined authority, which wasn't yet formed properly. But he said that's where the influence will be. Have the conversation with them, because TFN isn't really going to be a big player in all of this. Now, that was possibly a personal view, but again, it doesn't help us on the outside form a coherent picture of what's going to happen. Just one last point, the Integrated National Transport Strategy workshop in Newcastle at the beginning of the year, there was a gentleman from Cheshire who said Andy Burnham's ambitions for rail in Greater Manchester, if he sees them through, will you have to recognise that not all of those services operate wholly within Greater Manchester, and the consequence of more stops within Greater Manchester will be fewer outside. And Cheshire, of course, took a very dim view of losing out because of the big player that was controlling its rail services. So there are pitfalls and there are boundaries. So two of our stations are in Cumberland, and we have to have some thought for their services, so that if the North East Combined Authority does more for the 12 stations in the North East at the expense of the two outside, you can understand people in Cumberland not being terribly thrilled at that outcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Malcolm. Dawn and Tom, are you able to come back with some very brief remarks, and then we will need to wrap up?
For me, it's just a quick comment on my understanding is TFN in particular will cease to have funding, and I can't remember if it's from 26 or 27 onwards. So they will no longer be funded by government. So they are busy trying to work out what their position is, if indeed it is a position of anything. And I think that just follows the point of the expectation is that more local power will sit with MSAs, and through that network will be where that local regional decision making is happening. It won't necessarily be part of an entity like Transport for the North.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and some further comments in the chat on that. Tom, do you want to come in briefly?
Come very quickly try and answer your two questions, or 2 points, Malcolm. So first question, I think you have very astutely observed the fundamental tension in what's going on in the rail industry at the moment. On the one hand, the desire to end the fragmentation that is seen as being the cause of all the things that are wrong with the rail industry. Whilst at the same time, you've got local bodies like those on the call today saying, well, we'd actually quite like you to share some of your power with us. Now, I don't think that those are mutually exclusive, but I think there is a school of thought that's quite, I suppose you could call like a fundamentalist, sort of bring everything together, and anything that might sort of lead to any perception of fragmentation must be avoided at all costs, which I don't think is actually a very helpful view. Of course, British Rail was never so centralised in that respect. So I think it's also a bit of a mischaracterisation of a period of time that people are trying to get back to that sort of thinking. And then
Tom, we're going to need to wrap up.
Right.
Sorry,
Just do the first question then, Jules.
I think we could keep going with this conversation all day, but I'm conscious people will start dropping off because it is 11 o'clock. And I do need to say a big thank you to all of our speakers for giving their time and their really useful insights. Thank you to all delegates and all the questions and comments that we've had. I think some incredibly useful messages there about, there's still an awful lot up for grabs in the way that the railways interact with devolved authorities. At Community Rail Network, we're working hard to make sure that community rail is thought about as that is worked on. Some really important insights about regional authorities needing to be treated and seen as partners. Again, something we also want in community rail. And I think some critical messages there from Dawn, especially about how important community engagement is to devolved authorities, and how what a strong role community rail can play in that space. And I think some examples of good practice there too, in the way that devolved authorities are starting to work with community rail, which I think we can all look to wherever we are. Some actions that we will take away from Community Rail Network in terms of thinking about the communications that we put out, resources for members, and the follow-up webinars that we run on this topic. But please do keep talking to us. We will be sending out a feedback form for your opinions on this webinar, and you can also use that and your regular contact with our team to keep telling us what you need and want from us as your membership body on this topic to help us realise some of those opportunities. I am going to apologise for the fact we've overrun by a couple of minutes, but I think we've crammed in a lot. So thank you again. Yes, and we will keep talking on this topic. Have a good rest of the day, everyone, and see you all soon.